So,
That's perfect.
yeah.
We see you and your slides.
Okay.
So I will turn it all over to you to introduce yourself and we'll get started.
Are we ready to roll? Are we rolling?
We are rolling. It's all on
Okay.
you. I like I say, I like you to introduce yourself because
Sounds
you can
good.
probably summarize it a lot easier than I can.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Carol Cunningham. I am the State Medical Director for the Ohio Department of Public Safety Division, EMS. And although I can't see all your lovely faces, I'm glad you were able to get up and join us this morning. Um, just for disclosure, I also serve in several roles, other roles. I'm on the board of directors for the Committee on Tactical Emergency Casualty Care, and I also serve on the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate, which is tasked with creating avenues or technologies to help protect all first responders, whether it's law enforcement, medical, or fire. Um, I titled this presentation "Pearls of Wisdom from Our International EMS Partners," and essentially, there's a lot of things that we do in EMS that we learned from other countries or history, etc. It's important to know that we're all one planet, so yeah, a lot of these advances we may not be able to duplicate necessarily due to the structure of our medical system, but we can certainly adapt it to make it better for everyone, especially our patients. And if you have any questions along the way, I can't see you, but we can either save them for the end, or I don't mind if you stop and have a question about anything during the presentation. Advance that there. I'm sorry, I'm trying to work this. There we go. Okay. So let's start out with the vehicles. You know, everybody has a fancy ambulance right now, but that was not the case. In 1864, this is a picture of how they transported patients in Cincinnati. Um, oh, just as a disclaimer, I'm a Clevelander to the core. I live in Cleveland. I did do my emergency medicine residency and medical school in Cincinnati, but moved immediately back to Cleveland because that was no place for a Browns fan. So, basically it was a horse and buggy, and it was for transporting patients to the hospital. They also used it for transport of bodies to funeral homes. But the first vehicle that really had a staff that had some with medical experience was in June 4th in 1869 in New York City. And amazingly enough, this vehicle was electric powered on wheels in a time where there really was no chargers. So if you ran out of power, you're going to kind of be stuck in the street. And this is the equipment they had. They had bandages and sponges. They had handcuffs in case you had somebody who was unruly, a stomach pump, a straitjacket, a stretcher, and a quart of brandy, which was for anesthesia. But when you look at the items that preceded it, that actually may have been something that caused them to have all this equipment to kind of restrain somebody who had been injured, intoxicated, and in a bar fight. I'm having trouble advancing this thing. Try that. Okay, there we go. I'm sure in your studies you've probably heard about this document, which really changed the script. It was a document published by the National Academy of Sciences which was accidental death and disability, which was the neglected disease of modern science society. And it was published here in America, looking at the deaths from patients who had sustained trauma in motor vehicle accidents primarily, um, as well as the lack of suitable care if they took the patient to the hospital. Back in 1966, there were departments of medicine and departments of surgery, but the specialty of emergency medicine really did not exist. Um, the specialty of emergency medicine was established in the 70s, but prior to that, if you were on the medical staff of a hospital, you were required to take call to cover the emergency department. So you can imagine what it would be like if you were in a traumatic accident and showed up in the emergency department on the day that the ophthalmologist was on call for the ER. That you had probably have a pretty good chance of dying versus someone who had like the surgeon being on call, excuse me, or the anesthesiologist who could at least give you comfort measures while you bled to death. Um, some folks have heard of Freedom House Ambulance Service. I'm surprised at how many people who are actually seasoned in EMS have never heard of Freedom House. This is an ambulance service that started in Pittsburgh. Um, it was the very first paramedic staff EMS service in the United States. And it actually was, this started before the Civil Rights Act passed, and it was actually an all-black EMS service, except for two members who were white that I know of. Um, it basically provided service to the Hill District, which was a very underserved neighborhood in Pittsburgh for 8 years. Dr. Peter Saffer, who really did a lot of work with developing today's modern CPR, was also the person who developed their training course. And Dr. Nancy Caroline wrote their paramedic curriculum and became their medical director in 1974. John Moon, who's pictured there, who's still alive, was the first paramedic in the United States to ever perform an endotracheal intubation on a live patient. He did it with Dr. Caroline by his side. And I've met him, and to listen to him talk, this is something that only anesthesiologists did, but Dr. Caroline told him how to do it, uh, walked him through the process. The patient survived beautifully, but he was 18 or 19 years old, and he knew he was the first non-physician to do this. And when he talked to him, he goes, I just knew there was no margin for failure when you're the first person doing it, because if anything goes wrong, they'll never let anybody else do it again. I found out recently that Mitchell Brown, who was the director of public safety in Cleveland, was a former director of public of safety for the state of Ohio, actually was a member of Freedom House Ambulance. And as an example as to why it was needed, his motivation for joining this was that his mother uh, was having stroke-like symptoms at their house. And when he activated the emergency medical service, um, ambulances, there was no ambulance to respond. They would not go to the Hill District. Instead, the police came, and they refused to activate any medical service, and just told him that his mother was intoxicated. His mother did not drink. She died of the stroke, and that was his motivation for joining this, because they were all like 18 or 19 years old when they participated in this initiative. Um, some of you out there probably weren't born when Emergency was on TV. They rode in an ambulance called Squad 51. But what brought Emergency to television? It was a gentleman by the name of Jim Page, who was one of the founders of uh, oh, which magazine? I forget which magazine. I think it was gosh, yeah, the Journal of the EMS, I
Yeah,
believe.
gems.
Yeah, yeah, he was the founding editor, and the paramedic squads on existed in Europe, and he had traveled there and saw that there were paramedics in these ambulances, and And when he brought this show to the TV in 1972, it was novel. Like, oh my gosh, these guys are saving lives. And then when you realize that Europe had it, people started questioning, why don't we have this in the United States? Um, if you look on the picture that's right next to the wording, Kevin Tighe played the role of Roy DeSoto. And the guy on the right, Randy Mantooth, who played the role of Johnny Gage. Um, and both of them have done so much, not only as actors, but they have had ongoing commitment to EMS by funding various museums. Um, this particular show is actually enshrined in the Smithsonian. And people like, why would a TV show be there? But this was really the fuel that started the fire nationwide after the report on accident and disability came out to really create this in every community possible. Um, I will tell you, from a standpoint, my own personal standpoint, I was madly in love with Johnny Gage. I would watch this show when I was a little kid, and I would write him love letters and everything. And ultimately, I was speaking at a conference where he was a keynote speaker, and uh, long story short, we ended up cutting out on the fancy dinner that they were going to have, and we went down the street and had pizza together. And I had taken some of those love letters and I gave it to him. I said, when I was a kid, you're supposed to be I was supposed to be your second wife. So these are a little bit late, but he loved it. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. I know he's not doing well right now, but if you ever get a chance to go to a conference to hear him speak, he really speaks from the heart of and soul of what we do. All right, air medical services. Why do we have helicopters? Um, we learned a lot from different wars. Fixed wing aircraft was used to evacuate wounded soldiers in World War One, and then in Australia they started putting physicians actually on fixed wing aircraft so they could start delivering medical care in the back of the aircraft instead of waiting to the hospital to get to the hospital or whatever the treatment area was in an effort to save lives. Starting in 1950 as well as in 55 uh, during the Korean and Vietnam War, helicopters became the vogue. Helicopters were beneficial because you didn't need a landing strip. You just needed a clear area, and you could go into, um, as long as the landing zone didn't have a lot of wires, it was a great place to uh, pick up injured soldiers, and again start treatment. There were medics on the back of the helicopter, or trained soldiers who could start treating patients. The first helicopter hospital-based service that was similar to that and modeled after that started in 1972, which was Flight for Life in Denver, Colorado. Um, I remember when I started. Now I'm going to be dating myself. Uh, I flew for University Air Care in Cincinnati, and they had just won a battle to get their helicopter service in their department rather than the Department of Surgery. And I wasn't the first, but I think I was probably the second, one of the original fly girls in University Air Care. It was an exciting time. All right, from a standpoint of Homeland Security, um, uh, I will tell you, I was selected as one of a group of 12 to go on a special trip to Israel. And it was the first time they ever combined EMS with Homeland Security professionals. Um, I was the only woman on the trip, but that didn't matter. But we did a really deep dive into Israel's preparedness system, as well as their healthcare system and how they respond to multiple attacks. At the time I was there, um, they would in the community they sustained 3 to 4,000 car bombs a year. Um, their community, though, is very prepared. In Israel, it doesn't matter if you're going to college or going to work, they have mandatory military service starting at age 18. And I can tell you that because of that, as civilians, they're just as prepared as soldiers, something we don't see here in our nation. And they also have drills. When there's an alarm that goes off, an audible alarm that tells everyone that they need to either evacuate their homes or shelter at home, or if they're out and about, there's bomb shelters where they can go in. And there certainly is a spirit of the we rather than the me there, which is something that I think the military builds up. In terms of their national response, you've probably heard about the IDF, that's the Israel Defense Force. It's their top military team. It includes an Air Force, Army, and Navy. Um, when I was there, Al Qaeda was certainly a huge threat, but I felt very safe. We traveled around in a bus. We had the four top people from the IDF with us, two armed officers in the bus, and then an armed officer in front as well as behind the bus. And they would collect intel constantly all day and try and sometimes we'd be shifting positions because of various threats. Um, they shared they're very sharing of their resources and technology, which was great for us because they took us to like a shopping mall and showed us the things that they had done to help protect um, public areas. And then their border security technology was amazing. When we talk about CBRN protection, chemical, radiologic, biological, nuclear, and explosive preparedness, again, top notch. Um, One of the interesting things that we saw, Israel at the time would take in any um, endangered population from any country, but instead of just giving them a green card and saying, figure it out on your own, they put a big investment in placing these people in immigration centers where they give the adults job training, teach them the language. At the time we were there, they were taking in refugees from Africa, and you can imagine they'd never seen a washing machine, let alone a computer. Um, there was a daycare center that they would house the children and teach. They have schools there while their parents were at the training center. We were at the daycare center at a time when one of the alarms went off, and we actually saw this missile coming over from the Gaza Strip. And so we all went to the bomb shelter, and I distinctly remember sitting there. I felt these little hands on my arms, and then I just put my legs out and I had hands on my legs. But when I looked at these children's faces, they were very, very calm. This was the drill. This is what they knew they had to do to survive, but there was no panic in their eyes. And uh, when you compare to what it's like here, um, I think as a nation we can certainly do much better. Um, I've had teenagers just distraughtly panicked and crying, and you ask them what's wrong, and when they can finally speak, they're telling me, "Oh my gosh, I lost my cell phone. I don't have any friends I can call." I think we need to do better than that. If preschool kids who again don't even know the language are calm when those alarms go off. This is their police station. Um, they collected every piece of evidence and it's tagged on what day the bomb went off. And the police officers just would point at one piece of pipe or another piece of pipe, and we're investigating this and we're going to find out who did this, and just racks of these. The other amazing thing is that just demonstrates the resilience of the nation is after a car bomb goes off, they the building is literally rebuilt overnight. They will not allow like a ground zero that we had after 9/11 to exist because they feel like that shows weakness and pain. But they're back to business the next day. Mag and David Odom, which is also known as MDA, is they're really the country's emergency operations center and management. Um, Israel has a national healthcare system. There are hospitals all over the country. However, triage is done through the MDA because they have a line to every single hospital. They know where every single bed is and what the capabilities are. Um, when they have field medical care, it's rapid, it's very swift. They want to do airway control, IV access, and hemorrhage control, but only a small percentage of those casualties need life-saving procedures. So they are going to evacuate the scene as quickly as possible. Um, they will start IVs. They might do a little bit of medical care on scene. Again, life-saving stuff. And then there's a casualties medical escort that will get the patient, again, away from the scene. The speed at which they can do this is amazing. This is there's after they had a suicide bomb attack, they actually calculate and use this as a metric. They can have a scene completely evacuated, a mass casualty event, in under 1 hour. The response time is 4.6 minutes. They can get the first casualties out 11.5, and they try and go for the most critically injured. And then the last critically injured casualty is usually out within a half an hour. Something to strive for. Um, let's go fast forward here to the United States. Um, Again, a lot of you weren't born uh, during the Kent State shooting in May 4th in 1970, where there were 4 students that were killed in a protest when the National Guard was called in. I distinctly remember my parents' reactions, thinking, "Oh my God, we can't even send our kids to college. Will we be able to send our kids to college and have them be safe?" Um, a musical song that goes with it, if any of you guys are Graham Nash fans. This is a song about 4 dead in Ohio with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Fast forward to Columbine. Here we are 29 years later with probably one of the first huge mass casualty school shootings done by students. Um, um, from my own personal experience, I've been involved in 2 active shooter events, the first of which was in 1993 with the Wycliffe Middle School shooting. We had 6 children with minor injuries. Um, one death in the janitor, and then two critically injured adults. Um, a police officer and a teacher who had similar injury patterns, but different, um, very different vital signs. Um, we talk about trauma centers, but at that time, I was working in a community hospital with single coverage. I was the only doctor on duty. And it will just change your life if you've ever been part of one of these. Um, the coordination was good. Again, this is at a time where not every emergency department was staffed by someone who was trained in emergency medicine. Uh, when it came to triage, I triaged the minor injuries to the emergency department, a different emergency department, because I knew the doc there was not trained in emergency medicine, it was family practice. So he could take care of lacerations and bruises. So I got all three of the criticals with backup coming in. What did Columbine teach us? Back then, as you know, and certainly when you take your registry exam, they always ask you, is the scene safe? You can ask, is the scene safe? But it was always the practice for EMS to stand outside, wait for police to secure the scene, and then they would not respond to any patients until the scene was deemed safe. During Columbine, uh, Coach Sanders put a sign up in the window that really changed the script. He was wounded. He was alive enough to write this sign. He wanted to make sure that somebody outside knew that that he was there, because there was, they went throughout multiple places in the school. And you can see on the side of the sign it says, "Lily, please see me," but he put up a sign finally that said, "One bleeding to death." But again, the practice was just for EMS to stay outside. And certainly by the time law enforcement was able to wave EMS in, he essentially bled to death. Because of that, um, the rescue task force concept was developed. Um, it really started at the Fairfax County system in Virginia. And certainly led by a physician, Dr. Reed Smith. Dr. Reed Smith paired with Josh Shapiro, who is um, a paramedic who runs the EMS system, EMS education at Georgetown University, and a couple of other rogue docs got together in a hotel, and we said, we have to change this. The rescue task force concept is can be developed in any community, and it's basically EMS pairing with law enforcement personnel to deploy to areas that are actually on the scene of the incident to initiate just rapid fire life-saving treatment. Again, trying to save injured victims. There's three zones. The hot zone is where the shooter is or where the direct threat is, and there's no reason for EMS to go into that scene. That definitely is the scene for law enforcement. The cold zone is where EMS lived prior to Columbine. There's no threat. You're staging. You're providing care when victims are either removed from the scene or you're going in when the scene is deemed a cold zone. However, there's that middle zone, the warm zone, where there's going to be victims. There's an indirect threat because the threat may not have been confirmed to be um, secured or extinguished. But you have, again, people like Coach Sanders bleeding to death. In this concept, EMS will go in with law enforcement officers, usually definitely two, one in front, one behind, that are solely tasked to stay with the EMS providers and not run off and look for the active shooter. They're there to protect. The EMS folks that are there to give really quick, let me go back. a really quick life-saving treatment. In other words, you're not gonna be doing airway other than head positioning. You're not going to intubate somebody there. You're going to do a lot of hemorrhage control with tourniquets and basically travel light. Um, Following the rescue task force concept, those of us, again, I mentioned before, the first two are the one my experience in active shooter events. The Wycliffe Middle School shooting happened, I'm sorry, in '94, where we had 3 victims shot and 1 fatality. And then right down the street from where I live on February 27th of 2012, um, there were at the Chardon High School shooting, there were 3 fatalities with 6 victims shot by a fellow student. Um, Sandy Hook, uh, that really rocked the nation, December 24th, 2012. My counterpart in Connecticut, who you actually may have seen speak on this, Dr. Richard Kamen, um, was the guy that opened up the closet at Sandy Hook. Um, all the children were hiding in the closet. There was nobody to be saved. Probably the best thing that Rich did is he stood everybody down. He wouldn't let anybody in the room, and I applaud him for that. He saved a lot of folks from PTSD, a lot of first responders. When this happened, it really started a movement. One of the reasons why I'm on the board of directors of CTEC. There's the committee on TCCC, the Committee on Tactical Casualty Combat Casualty Care. It was started by the American College of Surgeons based on what they found saved lives with rapid treatment of military personnel. However, these are young, healthy adults. They came to us and said, now that we're seeing these school shootings, we really don't have any guidelines for civilians, let alone people of all age groups, whether it's babies, geriatric patients, or whatever, which caused us to go ahead and actually review autopsies, review survivor injuries, and write a set of evidence-based guidelines to to save lives for the general population, and also create guidelines for lay people who don't have medical experience, so we can train communities like they do in Israel on whether it's self-care if they get injured or injured by another party. I'm happy to say that this started out as a rogue project, but uh, as of as of November, CTEC is now used for the training of FBI, Secret Service. We have it incorporated into our state of Ohio guidelines, and it's been adopted by 57 nations. We've also uh, had the guidelines translated into other languages. We also gave it to President Zelensky in Ukraine, and they're using it to train civilians and their troops. So basically, for the rescue task force, again, care in the warm zone. Tourniquets are important, but for the civilian population, we have to realize that a lot of commercially available tourniquets are too large to really get the pressure you need to start bleeding and stop bleeding in infants and small children. So oftentimes it's better just to use direct pressure or do like they did with the Boston bombing. Civilians just took shirts and created their own tourniquets. Pressure dressing and compression gauze. For airway, again, you're not going to use endotracheal tubes. The other thing is you don't want to have the light of a laryngoscope blade in a warm zone because that light may tell the shooter where you are. So again, no electricity. We can do needle thoracostomies. to decompress a traumatic pneumothorax, place nasopharyngeal airways to kind of get the tongue out of the way, and then use chest seals for open chest wounds. There's some controversy whether lay people should be using chest seals because they don't know how to recognize the signs of a tension pneumothorax. However, there's chest seals they make that actually have a like a little burping thing on it. So for lay people, that if you're going to supply lay people, that's the ones to use because they'll um, self deflate if a tension pneumothorax were developed. You never ever carry oxygen into a warm zone because if a bullet hits it, you'll be jettisoned out. It's very explosive. Travel fast and light. Gosh, I completed the Harvard University's National Preparedness Leadership Initiative and was very, very fortunate to have Dr. Isaac Ashkenazi as one of my instructors. Isaac was the first Surgeon General that Israel had, and he really changed the system. Again, we saw the ambulances that uh, Johnny and Roy DeSoto used on emergency. But when you're going into buildings that are collapsed or going down alleys, you just need what's on the right. You just need something narrow and you want to travel light. He always said, travel fast and light. That's the way to save lives. Over the left is a very lightweight monitor that they use that can be carried on your shoulder, really, or be hooked up to the back of this motorcycle. There was a little small packet on the back of the motorcycle where it basically just had, again, those small airway devices that I previously mentioned, and uh, and interosseous needles, needles to decompress chest. And then if you needed a monitor, you had this, again, this really lightweight monitor. Isaac is back in Israel, and we communicate frequently. And again, he's amazing. Gosh, probably 10 years ago, I was there, and a bomb hit his house, and he still showed up for the lecture. He goes, they'll rebuild it. I'll be back home, later on today. And he was. It didn't faze him at all. So it goes back to, again, some of these things I already mentioned. One of the things that they do is, the drills for all ages. They have developed computer apps that are distributed by the MDA, which is their Emergency Operations Center, for to help people if they need a reminder on self-care and bystander care, similar to what we would do with our emergency medical dispatchers, giving pre-arrival instructions. Um, Again, for a computer app, it's great. It's just another extension of giving pre-arrival instructions. Now we're in a new age. We used to talk about active shooters. Now we really have to start talking about active assailants. Um, and this is the scary part. I mean, homegrown terrorism, wherever it is really difficult to track. Uh, in Japan on June 8th, actually in a school, a preschool, uh, a gentleman went in there with a knife and just stabbed a bunch of kids. There were 8 fatalities. During the railway station massacre in China, uh, it involved 8 assailants, active assailants, going into a secured train and stabbing multiple passengers with 31 fatalities and 141 injured. So you can imagine what kind of scene that was back in 2014. However, it wasn't the first time that there was an active assailant. one of the first vehicle ramming incidents actually happened in 1935 in Mexico. So there were multiple horses as well as their riders were injured. And then here in America, we had the Boston Marathon bombing. Again, no guns involved in the incident itself, just the bombing, with 14 fatalities in a public area, with 57 injured. Um, Claire Park is one. The CTEC has multiple international partners, but Claire Park is the director of London's EMS and ambulance service. And these are the things that she had to deal with to really change how they're dealing with mass casualty events. Um, the in March 20 in March of 2017, right outside the palace, there was a car ramming event where the car just drove into some passengers, and then the driver got out and just started stabbing people. So there was 5 fatalities and 48 injured before uh, the incident stopped, and then following that was the London Bridge attack, where there were again a vehicle ramming. A guy got out with a knife and started stabbing people before he was neutralized, and there were 8 fatalities and 48 injured. What has come out of that? Claire has instituted, or Dr. Park, I should say, 10-second triage. Um, Will it be adopted here in the United States? I don't know, but again, it's very interesting looking at different triage systems. Triage is how you sort your victims, and that way you can better allocate the resources and also make sure that the patient gets to the right place for their care. Um, and again, another disclaimer I should make. Dr. Kamen, my counterpart in Connecticut, and I are the co-principal investigators for the National Association of State EMS Officials National Model EMS Clinical Guidelines. It is the first set of evidence-based guidelines for EMS care of patients. The first edition was in 2011. Um, the third edition is out now, and we're hoping to write the fourth edition coming up. Um, when it came to triage, um, uh, it was an interesting experience because at that time, I think it was during the third edition or second edition, um, NHTSA, where EMS is based at the federal level, was really pushing their triage system, saying we should put that in there. But we did our research, and there was never ever a study that showed that one triage system was better than the other. You hear about start triage, you hear about jump start triage, um, the trauma triage guidelines. Um, what we ended up doing was saying everybody should have a triage system, and you should select the one that works best for your training, education, and resources. Um, and we still feel that way. NHTSA funded our project, and people thought we were crazy that we just didn't like fall over like dominoes and put it in. But we also didn't want to make this document something you could just buy yourself into. The only way you could get into this document is to actually do some evidence-based research. But having said that, triage is important, and certainly I hope that Dr. Park will come up with actually publish some of her studies to show how it's working in their system. Again, active assailants are really tough with multiple weapons. In this case, as you remember, on New Year's Eve of this year, a truck went through the barriers on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, and there were 14 fatalities. Um, the gentleman in the truck had a firearm, He didn't have time to shoot any of the patients who died, but he was neutralized prior to that. But certainly, if there was no one there to take him out, he would have continued his barrage on victims, um, or actually bystanders or people, pedestrians, uh, following the crash of his car. All right, let's get away from the violence and take a look at what we see every single day. Um, Infectious diseases are everywhere. Personal protective equipment is key. Um, when we talk about COVID, but uh, you still have to realize you as an EMS provider, uh, hepatitis still exists. Um, and that I think is still probably not as emphasized as much as it should. Um, HIV still exists. Um, just a lot of respiratory viruses, influenza, RSV, and COVID are probably the big ones that we worry about. COVID-19 was a real game changer. It was, as you probably know, it was the first major worldwide pandemic that we have had in terms of fatality in 100 years. H1N1 influenza was big, but the death rate was not like it was for the Spanish flu 100 years ago, nor for COVID. Um, if you Google, you'll kind of see what my journey was through COVID. I had a elective surgery uh, uh, right before it was announced, and due to the fact that I live by myself and I have steps to get up, the plan was for me to go into a rehab center for 1 week for PT to make sure I was safe to go up the steps and down the steps by myself. Um, 2 days after I got to the rehab center, they shut down visitation. Um, and then a couple days later, excuse me, Governor DeWine declared a stay-at-home order. So there was no outpatient PT. So my 1 week stay was extended. I was there 2 days shy of 6 weeks, uh, with no direct contact with friends, family, or anything. Um, but it was a great experience for me because I could see and talk to, there was fear everywhere. This is before the vaccine. I could hear what the plans that some of the rehab facility staff were making. Like, for example, one physical therapist's husband was getting chemotherapy, and if she got infected, they had a plan where they had a safe house that they created. They helped each other out. To go to the grocery store, a lot of folks would get off shift and the shelves would be cleaned out from just people hoarding. And they had a plan on, how to keep one woman's newborn with, with diapers. One of the great things that came out of this is that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security partnered with a private group called Project Echo. Project Echo is a global organization that looks at all kinds of health issues all over the nation. But they started having COVID-19 rounds. And I was first invited as a speaker to talk about my experience in the rehab center. And then once again, when the vaccines came out, and another one that I did on the mental health resiliency and suicide rates in healthcare workers just from job stress. But it was through that we realized that some patients were presenting in a different way. They didn't have respiratory symptoms. Um, And it was England gave a report on what they were seeing were pediatric patients with no respiratory problems were coming with gastrointestinal symptoms. And it was really important for us to identify that because these patients were still communicate, they could communicate and spread the disease by coughing or just breathing on someone without a cough because the virus was in their lungs. It was just affecting their GI tract. That's how they presented. So that really helped us, again, try and protect more people, at least put on, and as well as healthcare workers to put on PPE, even if they were responding to somebody who was vomiting or somebody with diarrhea. And when you think about it, that's probably something we should be doing every day. It was this group in Canada, France, Ireland, Mexico, Spain, and the USA who realized, again, just from sharing information and talking to boots on the ground pulmonologists, that when they were having trouble ventilating these patients who came in, sometimes they would get better oxygenation if they were placed in the prone position. So we started thinking, do we need to start developing uh, interfacility transport stretchers for ambulances where that could be done safely and also have uh, a different design so it would be comfortable for the patient as well as accessible for the paramedic to be able to watch and make sure the endotracheal tube was still in place, et cetera, while the patient was in a prone position for interfacility transport. What we found is, for those folks, if you rolled them prone, they would just almost go into respiratory arrest versus if you had them um, if you had them on their stomach, if you put them on their back, they would desaturate. So it's quite an issue, but again, it was a key for trying to look at different innovation that we could spin on a dime, again, to try and save lives. The other thing that I'll mention too about COVID was the PPE. There wasn't enough of it, just couldn't manufacture it enough. But again, that opened up an avenue where companies could try and sterilize PPE and reuse it. And there were different models that worked, but that also helped us mitigate some of the things that we needed to run that disaster that just ran for a year. Cardiac monitoring. Um, it's great now. Most states will allow paramedics as well as all levels in some states to perform pre-hospital EKGs. Back in the old days, if someone had a heart attack, you gave them aspirin, you put them in bed, you gave them nitroglycerin, and you would hope that they would survive. Then came the age of cardiac catheterizations, where they go ahead and insert a catheter into the vascular system and look for blockages in the heart. Um, and then, okay, they found blockages, then they go to have bypass surgery. But then stent placement was developed. So there was a non-invasive way of opening up an obstruction in a coronary artery without cracking open somebody's chest to do it. In the pre-hospital setting, here in the United States, um, your cardiac monitors typically only monitor lead 2, which only really truly gives you rhythm. So to diagnose a STEMI, you really need to have a 12-lead EKG. Back in the 90s, I had the opportunity to um, go on a site visit at Mallinckrodt, and it totally changed the way I look at folks with chest pain with normal EKGs. Um, the monitors that they made for the United States only read 1 lead. The monitors that they were shipping overseas were able to measure continuous 12-lead monitoring. It would measure all 12 leads. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see up close, this particular um, monitor is showing an acute STEMI. You can see there's some ST segment elevation in the leads. They did a study on 12 lead cardiac monitoring in patients who showed up with chest pain. What they found is just like your blood pressure goes up and down, your heart rate goes up and down. What you see on a cardiac monitor can change too, whether it's a rhythm, well, it's ST segment elevations or ST segment changes or not. Um, sometimes there's a clot that's going back and forth in the coronary artery or an obstruction that doesn't really reveal itself unless the coronary artery has a little bit of spasm. They found that sometimes on a continuous 12 lead, you'd have ST segment elevation that if you had done a static EKG, you would be racing that patient to the cardiac cath lab. They found that sometimes it would happen when the patient was asleep and they wouldn't, the discomfort wouldn't wake them up. Those who were awake, they went in and asked them, were you having some chest pain? And some of the patients would say, yeah, my chest was bothering me, but I didn't want to interrupt somebody or bother somebody. I was just going to see if moving it would make it go away or swallowing some water would make it go away. And then you'd have other patients who would say, yeah, I had chest pain, but I know you're monitoring me. So if there was something wrong, you'd tell me. So it's great that we ask patients and reassess, how's your pain? How's your pain? But they may have pain and not tell you that they're having it again because they're, where we go and get a repeat 12 lead. So I hope that one of these days, 12, continuous 12 lead cardiac monitoring will be the norm, not only in our hospitals, but it would be great if we had that for EMS. Again, I think that'll be a lesson to be learned from other nations that will hopefully come to America one day. Um, Asset delivery and scene safety has again really changed. During H1N1, oh no, I take that back. It was shortly after 9/11, and there was a fear of anthrax attacks on the general public. And one of the things that you can do for anthrax is to take Cipro. So one of the plans was if there was a mass casualty incident in a community, um, you would be asked to shelter in place, and the male personnel would be tasked to, with a police escort, deliver Cipro in every mailbox in America. We can imagine what that would be like waiting for the mail. Uh, this things happen in rural areas just as well as they can happen in metropolitan areas. And yet there may be patients here in the rural areas who are waiting hours to get their Cipro. There also is the hoarding. We wouldn't want our mailmen to get shot because somebody is trying to still hoard their neighbors or as much Cipro as they can. And this was being delivered not based on how many residents were in the house, it was just based on buildings. So you can imagine kind of the mayhem that would happen. Also, it's not always safe to deliver things into an austere environment. So things have been developed, as you know. We have robots that can deliver medications. We have remote control vehicles that can take supplies into scenes. Um, they can actually search the scene too once they're in there to see if there's any threats within without having human personnel go in and risk their lives. And then delivery of devices through drones or air support has been utilized. The challenge we have, which is an FAA issue, is what is someone having a drone for personal use and fun versus a drone that's being used for good purposes like search and rescue or delivery of devices, as well as the bad guys using drones to kind of search out something that they're planning on bombing in the future, or to drop a WMD on a community. So all these things are things that have to be considered, but it certainly is much better than the mailman, showing up with medication that's direly needed in a WMD attack. Pain management. Um, as you know, in this country, we have an opioid crisis. I'm in the state of Ohio, and we are typically in the top 5 of states in the nation that have opioid deaths. Um, Most recently, Ohio was one of 5 states selected to participate in a National Governors Association paired with the CDC to expand the role of EMS in identification and treatment of opioid overdose. And um, one of those things that we would like to use is Suboxone, where EMS could actually, if someone is withdrawing after opioid overdose, even after they've gotten naloxone, that we would be able to get them started on Suboxone and pair them with mental health and recovery services from the field. Number one, it gets people on recovery, and two, it doesn't necessitate a trip to the emergency department if the person is recovered. There are some systems where EMS can actually either have the mobile health crisis team or take them in an ambulance directly to a rehabilitation center rather than going to the emergency department for medical clearance after that. Um, in a way, we're our own. We have ourselves to blame for the opioid crisis partially. Again, you guys are probably not old enough to remember, but the JACO, which is the organization that accredits hospitals, is mandated to come up with different methods of improving patient care. And one of them was pain management. One year they decided pain management. And so they were looking at how many patients would receive pain medications. And because this was public information for the hospitals had to report, some hospitals actually hired staff in the emergency department to go up to a physician. If you sent somebody home with Motrin, and they would like, well, I'm not sure. I think you need to give them stronger. They were like encouraging or intimidating physicians into writing narcotics. So it should be no surprise that we now have an opioid crisis. Penthrox, which is an methoxyflurane, is an inhaled non-opioid analgesic. It has been available overseas for decades, yet um, it's not available here in the United States. And that to me is frightening. It's delivered just like you would deliver a dose of albuterol through a metered dose inhaler. The medication is in this packet. You just put that tube of Penthrox inside the delivery device, and the patient inhales it. It gives effective analgesia, number one, without starting an IV, number two, without the risk of addiction, and it's very effective. I've seen multiple videos of live patients who have arm fractures, hip fractures, very painful medical or traumatic conditions. One dose of Penthrox, and they're smiling as the patient is being moved from by EMS from the floor to the cot, and with little to no side effects. So I'm hoping at some point in time that Penthrox will be approved by the FDA. One of our battles here is that it costs money to go through the approval process. And certainly once pharmaceutical companies that they're making things for patients, but their driving line is profits. So one of the reasons why medications are so expensive, they have a patent that lasts 7 years, so they have to make their money for research and development the first 7 years. But then after it goes generic, it's a lot less expensive. Um, some companies just don't want to go through the process and pay the extra money. Likewise, that's contributing to our drug shortage problem where we have a contaminant in a factory or whatever, they shut down, and then to get back into business, they have to go through the FDA approval again. But sometimes, again, the bottom line is if it costs more to get back in the game than it does to make the product, some companies just elect to not make the product. But that's a detailed explanation why we don't have Penthrox here, because the company that manufactures it has just doesn't feel like going through the FDA process was worth it for them. But it would be a great asset here in America if we had access to that. And then look at the past. Medicine is an art and not an exact science, and things change. Things that we thought were good for people may not be good for people. Back in the ancient times, if you had any type of ailment, bloodletting was supposed to be therapeutic. Um, Obviously not. And now we're looking at blood transfusions by paramedics, whether it's red blood cells, plasma, platelets, or now whole blood is being touted. Um, I'm sure many of the scopes of practice allow blood transfusion, particularly for intra-facility transports, where you have transfusion going on to get a patient to a higher level of care or to a hospital that they need a certain resource, whether it's by ground or air. Whole blood is kind of a new concept. Um, It'll be interesting to see how research shows up in the future to see if whole blood actually impacts survival better than, say, giving a patient packed red blood cells and a dose of TXA if they're hemorrhaging from trauma. But time will tell. Okay, and then my thing is, all things are possible if only you believe. To the right, it was my pizza dinner with Randy Mantooth. Uh, that's my favorite teddy bear Maynard, who's, the biggest, most important paramedic in my community, is, as they say. Um, we had a great time. And then I've served on the presidential medical response teams for several missions here locally. I flew chopper, as I mentioned, in Cincinnati. I was a flight physician for 7 years, 4 years in Cincinnati. And then when I moved to Cleveland, I would fly on my days off for 3 years with Metro Life Flight before they asked me to be EMS medical director for my county and had to sleep sometime. But I was on a presidential detail on the one at the left, and one of the Secret Service guys radioed me and said, "Hey, Dr. C, we understand you're a flight doc. Would you like to get on Marine One and check it out?" Of course, what's the answer to that? Twist my arm. But, I believe in the team approach, and I said only if my guys can come with me. So I live in a small community, but we stick together. There's the Kirtland Fire Department, and we got a great picture of us in front of Marine One after they actually took us inside and we could see all the cool equipment in there. So, what are our opportunities? It's great. You have to know your community. There's no doubt about that. And I encourage all of you to be strongly engaged with your state EMS office, but realize that I think you can be a better provider and a better leader of an organization if you talk to people from all over the world. Um, I've served on and continue to serve on the board of directors and advisory boards of other groups here on the federal level, the national level, as well as the international level. Most recently, within the past 2 years, Mick Gunderson, who I've known forever, um, was asked by the National Association of EMS Educators to launch an online journal, the International Journal of Paramedicine. And that's very interesting to read. It's online. As a disclaimer, I'm on their peer reviewers, I peer review for them. But again, it's evidence-based research from all over the world and patient care measures that you probably never thought about. Not that you could, like I said, not that you could implement them exactly, but you can take these pearls of wisdom and potentially modify them to work for the system that you have and the healthcare structure that you have. Project Echo is continuing. We did the COVID-19 clinical rounds for 2 years. Currently, they do rounds on for clinicians, people, doctors and nurses in hospitals. I wish there was one that was more focused on EMS, but I'm always an invited panelist along with several other of my EMS colleagues. So we always make sure that that's addressed regardless of the topic that they're on. And then in my role with Homeland Security's Science and Technology First Responder Resource Group, we liaison also with FAFRI, which is the International Forum for the Advancement of First Responder Innovation. Um, Most of our meetings are either in Brussels or Stockholm. And I and myself and one of a very seasoned paramedic from California, and I are often representing the United States, the medical sector at these meetings. It involves there's three sectors: medical, fire, and law enforcement, and it's a wonderful exchange. I can't tell you how many great ideas I've been able to bring back and again implement in Ohio to help enhance patient care as well as first responder safety. So in closing, I always say sharing is caring, and when you share these golden nuts of wisdom, there shouldn't be any geographical boundaries. You may have your language barriers, but if you have a translator, if you have music, you can communicate with the entire world. All right. Any questions? I'm going to see if I can escape and share my screen. Let me just close that.
So we've got looks like a couple people typing, so some
Okay,
questions might pop up.
that's okay.
Uh,
I'm trying to get to that screen now.
it's uh it's the
Okay,
chat
there you
screen
go.
that we're
Okay,
that we're
got it
hitting
here.
on. Um, we are fortunate to be in the area, the Northern Kentucky area, where we share protocols with uh, Southwest Ohio. So you see, basically, if you think about the I-275 belt, almost all of those departments are working together to promote uh, advancement in protocols, and it's just kind of neat to come to some of these protocol meetings and you see so many different concepts brought to bear to examine and look at things. So your input from Ohio does trickle down to us here in Kentucky, believe it or not.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you guys are right across the border, and
Yep.
and Cincinnati. Like I said, I'm biased. Back then there were hardly any residency programs, but Cincinnati and depending on who you talk to, and Henry Ford were the best programs. But we were there when it really started. There are things that they don't allow docs to do anymore. I don't know if you ever get a chance to uh, get to a lecture or meet Dr. Mel Otten. He's an attending there. He is like the GOAT. He military trained, board certified in toxicology and emergency medicine, former president of the Wilderness Medicine Society. And when we started, he said, we're going to, we beat out the Department of Surgery. We're going to do anything to save a life. We would do rope rescue. We did rappel. He taught us how to rappel. We would do a rappelling drill off of an 8-story Holiday Inn. Things they don't let docs do anymore. But I'm so glad to have been around then because I don't know. It's kind of pampered chef now, when they're on the chopper. And also, you guys are near Dayton, which really has a great developed team for austere environments. They have that one, Calamityville, that training facility where they can drill for, again, with other sectors of first responders on all kinds of events, whether it's active shooters or bombings or things like that.
So we had Dr. Cunningham scheduled for our conference last year, and of course that got canceled due to the unfortunate events. The other talk that we had her scheduled for was on the Palestine train wreck, which I still love to hear. Uh, I've always digged into hazmat, so I would have loved to have heard that. So maybe we'll reach out and see if in your busy time, uh, you have some time for that uh, presentation.
Yeah, that event is still going on in terms of litigation and I mean I can talk as litigation won't stop me from talking, but trying to get the community to recover. And it also showed that particular event was interesting too because the Palestine train derailment occurred in a rural area on the close to the Pennsylvania border. So we had responders coming in from out of state. And oh, I thought somebody was asking a question. Um, and and it also overlapped FEMA regions, which was interesting too.
Hmm.
So, who's in charge? I got a phone call about uh and again, it wasn't from the EMS office. It was someone from the governor's office who wasn't real savvy.
I
Like,
think it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Or did I put it on? Yeah. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah. But you're in the queue. No.
Oh,
somebody's put on their schedule. I don't know.
yeah.
Um, but um, but it was interesting in that they thought, what are we going to do with these first responders coming in? They have a different scope of practice. Well, my feeling is, just let them use the scope of practice they use every day. Don't go changing things like that, you know. And if you put yourself in the patient's shoes, if you need an airway, do you really care who is intubating you? You just want to, you don't care about the letters behind their name. You just want to know that they know how to do it and they're good at it. So that's the way we left it. I was just looking in the chat. Some people love, people who met Randy Mantooth. That's good. I was madly in love with him, as well as Buddy Bell, who played for the Cleveland Indians. But my first true true crushes. Hey,
Oh, it
Tony,
looks, yes, ma'am.
I was gonna say, if you do an evaluation, send it to me. I'm always looking a way to make it better, or if there's anything that people thought was really helpful, that's helpful. I like feedback.
All right. I will work on that, and I will send out the rosters and etc. Later on today.
Okay,
So
thank
I
you.
think uh, we've taken enough of your time, and I really appreciate you coming in. I really enjoyed the stories before the class, and the class was great. And thank you so much for your time.
Should I invite them to the flip side of my life? No, what we're saying, I'm also on the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Tri-C Board of Advisors. So music is a flip light side. So I'd invite y'all to come to Cleveland and check out the museum. I just got back from Dublin, Ireland last night, where we had our board retreat, and I had dinner with Bono years ago, but we were reveling with Bono, the Edge, and all their high school buddies. So tons of fun. Well, thank
Me
you.
too. Thank you.
All right, you guys have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you, Dr. Cunningham. That was awesome.
Thanks. You're welcome.